What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? We had an HR lady who was extremely power hungry. She is walking around with the president of the company who flew in from Japan. She rushes him through the warehouse, just spits out, "Oh, these are the warehouse guys. We don't have to stop and talk to them." He stops, walks over, and starts talking to me about my last vacation, how buying my house went. You could just see her fuming behind him as we talked for almost 45 minutes. I've had multiple meetings with him. We knew each other really well. I don't think he liked her and drug it out on purpose, but I was thrilled to see her just standing there, bored as hell. Story 2. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually, the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day, she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. Story 3. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus-hour days, 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking crap. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is ducked up and the department manager was a total moron, and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know crap about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site, out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to Karen my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only could fire him. I said, "And right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. Story 4. A coworker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this Karen sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. Story 5. I had a rough childhood with an addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working, again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. We already had warnings, and it wasn't the first time that it happened. I was young when this all happened, and probably didn't even know what a deed or title was at that time. If I stopped paying, we no longer had a house. A constant argument from parents to their kids is that they pay for the roof over your head, so you'll do what they tell you. They rarely say, "I own the deed, you do what I tell you." Story 6. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants, which in and of itself is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the duck he was doing here. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point, he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back point to the door, universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. Story 7. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him, and he just starts unloading, cursing, name-calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the duck I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money. If I'm busy being yelled at, I'm not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. Story 8. In my first apartment, my parents came to visit and I said duck when I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, "You can't talk like that," and stopped mid-sentence. Story 9. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client, and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. Story 10. I worked at a movie theater, and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, "Get the duck out," and the customers went, "You can't say that. This isn't your theater. We're customers." Mall security guy promptly said, "This is my mall, and I can do whatever the duck I want." Story 11. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet, and a lower-level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, "Show me the pass card or you're not entering." Few days later, this worker got a bonus. Story 12. When I was in high school, I worked at Popular Warehouse Club selling computers on the weekend. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I'd make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers. Nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while, as in half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power-tripping shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not." At this point, it would be more cost-effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution? The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. Story 13. One of my jobs is in a hotel, restaurant, bar. A guest came into the bar after having been refused service at our sister hotel down the road. He was very drunk and had been rude, abusive, and threatening to the staff. He insisted we serve him as he was a guest, but we'd already been phoned by our sister hotel so they could let us know what the situation was. We refused, but offered him some water and suggested he go up to his room. He then went on about how he had nearly bought our hotel and that he was practically our boss, so we should serve him or he'd have us fired. We refused. He told us he was a very rich man and would tip us hundreds of pounds if we served him. We refused. He was getting abusive at this point, so we again suggested he have some water and head up to his room. He went on to tell us that his brother was the mayor, so we should serve him. We refused and told him he should go on up to his room yet again. He then said he was going to the pub across the street, but all the pubs, restaurants in our town have a barred from them all policy. We telephoned the other pubs to inform them of the situation. Many of them got back to us and said they had been offered money, been threatened with losing their jobs, and also told the story of the mayor. All of the pubs stuck to their guns and refused to serve him. Eventually, he came back to the hotel and went to his room. Story 14. When I was still a child, I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride, knowing that they're still indebted to them and had nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents, they move to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berate my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad weren't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. Story 15. When my crap father kicked me out of the house and then demanded he have access to my bank to control my financial situation, and I got to tell him, "You have no control over me anymore. You set me free when you kicked me out, and now you can't do crap." Story 16. My job right before my current one. Property manager, the owner was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude, and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinion. 3 years after, we were a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment of when I said, "I don't know, I'm not paid to have opinions here." That was a year ago, and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. Didn't expect this to blow up. But yeah, I'm petty. What's new? Thanks for the awards. To those who mentioned, this was a very brief summarized version, and yes, he did remember saying it to me. He told me I was being too sensitive and should take more money. I've kept in touch with my awesome supervisor, and in the year since I've left, the position has yet to be filled. Everyone keeps quitting because they can't work with someone like him. The new job, a year-ish in, is doing great, and still to this day, almost cry at the thought that I have benefits that include health insurance and a boss that doesn't call me sweetie in a tone that indicates I can't chew gum and walk at the same time. Story 17. New director. Decides admin should hold a meeting at noon MF in the nurses' lunchroom and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response, "Please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break." No response. His peers and higher-ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up in so many levels. Story 18. My parents were yelling at me, and then my grandpa walks over and tells them both to sit the duck down. They both shut the duck up and sit their ass down on the couch. It was by far the most powerful thing I've ever seen him do. Story 19. When my manager at McDonald's gets into Karen fights with all the aggressive, toxic customers and booting them out the store by calling the mall security if they refuse to leave. Story 20. A few years ago, I interviewed for a job in the US that was labeled as a senior level position, which is my level of experience in this field. I go through 2 phone interviews and a stellar in-person interview. Shortly after the in-person interview, they called me and say they absolutely loved me and that I would be a great fit at the company. However, they thought I was a little too green, implying I was inexperienced, for the senior level position. But lucky for me, they have an opening for the junior level position at a salary decrease. I kindly told them that the reason I applied to their job posting in the first place was because it was a senior level position and that I wasn't going to take a step backwards in my career by taking a junior level position since I had both the appropriate experience and the work history. I also let them know that trying to trick someone with senior level experience into taking a junior level position by stringing them along through interviews and a job offer was deceptive and unethical. There was silence over the phone for a moment, and then the interviewer said in an offended tone, "Well, we've all had to make sacrifices for company name." To which I replied, "You may have had to, but I don't make sacrifices for anyone." Stunned silence. Then the interviewer, who was so appalled that they didn't know what to say, replies, "Well, maybe you can think about it and I'll call you tomorrow to check in." I said, "No, thank you, and please don't call me," and hung up the phone. They do this a lot to young females, people like myself, in a variety of industries. Don't take crap from anybody. Know your qualifications, believe in them, and tell abusers' assholes to duck right off. Your talents will be appreciated and paid for elsewhere. I promise you. The industry I'm in is marketing, and I'm currently a senior graphic designer. It wasn't my intention to imply that this only happens to female. That being said, my perspective is that of a young female in the corporate world, and it isn't always easy to discern discrimination against my perceived age and discrimination against my sex. Story 21. I used to work at a few Subways. Thing is, the owner inherited them when she already had a busy and lucrative career elsewhere. She mainly held on to them to employ immigrant family members, I think. One time, she was in the back when she heard me interact with an angry customer. Afterward, she came out and said, "You know you don't have to take crap like that. I trust you. You can use your judgment and just toss anybody out who talks to you like that." After that, I wouldn't take any crap from anybody. Slightest hint of backtalk to your sandwich artist, and you were out on your ass, still hungry. It was so much fun. "Let me speak to your manager." "No, get out. I'm going to call and complain." "Oh, I'm terrified." "Go nuts, but you can't call from in here because you're trespassing now." The sheer indignance of an entitled customer when you don't bow and before them is really something to behold. Story 22. I have one that crosses with "I don't work here, lady" a bit. I have a job, but I will still do interviews every couple years. This means the script is flipped a bit. They have to convince me to work there, and anyway, I got to town early, so I stopped at a bakery to get something to eat. The woman went in the back to get it, and this squat toad of a woman walks in, yells at me to get her order, and then yells at me again for not getting up right away to serve her. When I point out that I do not in fact work there, she goes off me about how important she is, etc. We can skip the play-by-play. I go the interview. Head of IT and the toad woman walks in. She has this evil grin on her face. I stop everything. I point at the toad woman and I say something like, "I have seen how your management treats people, and I have no interest in working for you." And I take my resume out his hands and walk out. The look on her face was priceless. Oh, and he had walked in with a print of a resume, so I took his copy. Felt great to do. Story 23. I work at a hotel. It's high-end, so we often take the approach of just appeasing guests no matter what, so I frequently have to bite my tongue. However, we have a very desirable parking lot, and when people poach it, we boot them. I love enforcing these because I don't have to bite my tongue or apologize, as they aren't guests. My favorite one was this. Girl parks and walks to neighbor hotel. Our GM happens to be in the lot and says, "Hey, just FYI, this is parking for X hotel, not Z hotel." She proceeds to say, "Duck you," flips him off, and walks into neighbor hotel. GM calls me and tells me. I giggle, grab the boot, and slap it on her car. She comes back screaming and ranting. I tell her the cost is $200. She calls the police. The police ask, "Is this a private lot?" "Yes, okay, then pay them." She refuses to pay and storms off. I get a call requesting the manager. I speak with them. It's the girl's mom. She is trying to say, "Oh, my daughter didn't know. She was for a job interview." I let her go on, and when she finally stops making excuses, I tell her that her daughter flipped off the GM, and there is no way the boot is coming off without payment. On top of that, I tell her when she pays, she better not come in swearing or yelling, or the price goes up to $300. She hangs up, the daughter comes back, and silently hands me $200, with a look of rage on her face. I've never been so internally giggly before. Story 24. 15 years ago, I worked for a company in Germany that was bought by a large US company. One of the first actions was a mandatory HR meeting. They used their US PowerPoint deck and guided us through the rules and regulations, although directed by our local HR team to not do that. Here are some of the highlights. We are not allowed to accept tickets for the Super Bowl. Utterly confusion. 90% of the people had never heard of the Super Bowl. A discussion about why we would want to watch that anyways started. We are not allowed to have a relationship with anybody, from a supplier or within the company. Uproar in the room. This is against the German Constitution. What you do in your free time is none of their business. The discussion gets heated. Everybody is discussing. The Americans on the line are very confused why the head of QA finally gets up and shouts, "If I love that woman, nobody will prevent me from dating her." People signed the sheet that they participated and read and understood the presentation with reservation. People start discussing where to sign up for legal expenses and insurance. HR refrained from that day from having mandatory global HR meetings. Management tried a couple of other stuff. At will employment, against the law. Everybody has a contract. Cutting vacation, against the law. Canceling bank holidays, against the law. Make people work on vacation days. Guess what, against the law. And a couple more. It was a prime example of cultural ignorance and incredible funny. Story 25. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitude. At the end of my tenure, our store was set to be closed, and for the last month, the store was sold to a liquidation company, meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella, and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no, and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. Story 26. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting, and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed, left half his order on the counter, and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. Story 27. I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an abusive prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner, knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week, threw me in a pool when I was small, and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid and your own mother doesn't give a crap how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said, "Go ahead, tough guy. Hit me as hard as you can right in the gut," thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment, and I knew it. He was a small man, 5 feet 6 inches. I was at least as tall as him already, and as he gave me his crap-eating grin, I pulled my fist back and ducking belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was ducking pissed. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. "You told him to do it. If you weren't ready, it's your fault, not his." One of the most satisfying moments of my life, and one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. Story 28. Not sure if it fits, but during an insanely busy weekend before Christmas, a Karen was complaining to every associate about how messy our store was. The manager had relieved the girl at the fitting room and was helping to hang stuff. Karen pulled her crap and was trying to make a point that we were messy and a horrible place to shop. This manager told her roughly, "Ma'am, we're messy at the moment because we're a popular store. And the biggest reason we're messy is because of women like you who can't be bothered to pick up after themselves. It's not the associates making the mess. It's people like you. Your type have us outnumbered." First time I actually witnessed someone deflate. Story 29. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home. We end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company. So we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home. So he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside, he shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that. And that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that. To which she says, "When you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want." So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years. We're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding. Celebration after the end of the plague. Story 30. Probably watching a few Texas DPS officers realize they couldn't shut down a whole airport. I was working as a flight instructor at small airport on a Saturday afternoon. We had one plane that had an issue on takeoff and veered off the runway. It cartwheeled and totaled the airplane, but fortunately the pilot was not seriously injured. I had a student who was next in line for takeoff when it happened. He called me from his phone as it happened. I hopped in the airport car with one of the rampers and drove out to the plane with a radio to inform inbound planes to use the other runway. We had no control tower. On the way to the runway, I called the airport manager who drove to the airport, and on his way, he made a phone call to officially close that runway. About 30 minutes later, a metric ducton of DPS officers showed up and immediately tried to close the whole airport, treating it like a giant crime scene. They were carelessly driving around the airport like they owned the place, ignoring the planes that were moving around and crossing our only open runway without regard to inbound traffic. A mechanic and I tried to tell them to be careful, and they got mad at us. One of them told me they were locking it down a couple times, meaning the whole airport. Now I was a broke-ass flight instructor, and I had a flight that afternoon that was ultimately going to help pay for me to eat that week. The airport manager was a short, stereotypical country guy, also former Navy. He was not intimidated at all by the cops trying to close his airport. When he showed up, I was about to go out with a student who was pref-lighting for a cross-country. There were about 5 cops in the lobby, me with my flight bag, the airport manager, and a mechanic. One of the cops saw my flight bag and said, "I don't know why you have that or why he's out at the plane, "You aren't going anywhere." The moment he finished his sentence, the airport manager said, "It's one runway that's closed. The airport is still open." This pissed off the cops. I was about to head out the door, and one of the officers said he was driving out to the disabled plane. The pilot had been gone for about an hour. The mechanic said, "You need to be careful." And the cop quickly retorted, "And why the heck is that?" And he said, "Because this is still an airport, and the first thing that hits you is going to be a propeller." A few seconds later, a plane took off as one of the cars was approaching the runway intersection ironing in that point. I walked out, and as I was hopping in the plane with my student, the same cop came up to me and said, "You aren't going anywhere. We're locking this down." I looked at the airport manager who followed all of us out to the ramp. He said, "Have a nice flight." You could see these cops just fuming that they didn't have the authority to close down an entire airport because one plane went off the runway. The airport had 2 runways. Where the disabled plane was located was probably a mile or so away from the open runway. Why they were making a big fuss, I don't know. The occupant was relatively uninjured. His wife was the worst thing he had to deal with that day. He told her he wasn't going to fly. We had a good flight, and I got to eat dinner that week. Story 31. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening because it's hot during the day, and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit when I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the streetlight and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside, he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now! I'm inside!" In that father-to-daughter, don't you make a mess tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house," and just ducking let loose with the hose. He was soaked, worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Story 32. My dad is 6 feet 3 inches. I'm 6 feet 10 inches. Sometime in my early teens, I shot past him. Dad was a yeller, not doing what he thought I should be. No discussion, just yell. But I realized at some point that he wouldn't yell at me if he had to look up while he was doing it. I don't remember what our last argument was about. I just remember that I'd sort of caught on at this point. So I'm in my room in front of the computer. Dad comes in and starts yelling at me. I eventually stand up and start yelling back. Dad makes an excuse to leave. Dad comes back about a half hour later and starts yelling again. But at this point, it's all I can do to not just laugh. I know that the instant I stand up, the argument will end. It actually wound up being really good for our relationship, and because Dad realized that he actually had to make valid points rather than just going into former drill sergeant mode. Story 33. College job. Retail. I usually did stock/warehouse stuff, but I could run register if needed. I was doing this one day in a surge, and towards the end, the lines were gone, 3 other registers operating, so I put up the little chain in front of the checkout lane and turned off the register light while taking care of a last customer with a bunch of cat food cans, time-consuming. With the rush gone, I wanted to head back and check in on the warehouse and relieve anyone for a break if necessary. Plus, there were other cashiers. This Sam Elliott wannabe-looking dude walks on up while I'm finishing and just unhooks the chain and plops his crap down. Doesn't ask me about anything. Doesn't even make eye contact. And listen, in most cases, I bent over backwards for customers. But his disregard and the fact that I was heading back to college in a couple days led me to finish the cat can dude and then just walk away and said, over my shoulder, "Hey, can you put the chain back up on your way out?" If he'd just asked, I would have helped him out. But if you've worked service jobs, you have extra sensitivity for people treating other service workers like they're nothing. Story 34. I was working a lab assistant shift. I'm a tech, receiving specimens and such, when a doctor phoned the lab. He was very upset that there was a test that was taking far too long in his opinion. I said, "Okay, let's look at it," and asked what the test was. A fungal culture. A fungal culture takes at least 2 weeks to see if anything grows. The patient was in the ER. I politely told him the test was a send-out and they generally take about 2 weeks or longer depending on the fungus. He got all huffy and asked why it took so long and is there a way to speed up the process since he wants to discharge the patient. I chuckled a little because this is a common problem with cultures. We're literally waiting for stuff to grow. We can't just make them grow faster. I told him we don't have magical wands that make fungus grow really fast. He then asked for a lab tech because I was just a lab assistant. I then let him know I was in fact a lab tech with experience in microbiology, and I can tell him from firsthand experience that fungal cultures are some of the slowest cultures. Right up there was AFBs, and assured him that if anything comes of it, we'll let ER know. He didn't really like that, but said fine and hung up. Story 35. Ooh, I have a good one. I was responding to a call with our volunteer fire department a couple years ago. I was west of town and a vehicle rolled halfway between where I was and the fire hall. So I called the responding people and said, "I'll meet you there." It was a single vehicle that rolled, and they were all immigrants from the Pakistan/Afghanistan region. Before I got there, a doctor from the same region had stopped to lend a hand. She was from the similar region as those involved in the crash, and I had assumed she was the 8th person in the van. She started to try to order me around and tell me I only needed to know certain information about the patient she was with. It went something like this. Doctor, she has midline neck pain and sore ribs. Me, okay, and crepitus or deformity to the nectar. That's all you need to know. Me, what? Doctor, I am a doctor, and that's all you need to know. That's when I figured maybe I should ask what kind of doctor, in case this is some whack-do who just claims to be a doctor like we've had happen before. She tells me she's a podiatrist. I gave her my best look of trying to be nice, but their feet are fine right now. When doctors or nurses show up on scene, they ultimately can trump EMS, but they have to actually do the work and sign off as having taken patient control. As soon as I asked her to sign the paperwork and ride with us to the hospital, she realized she was out of her knowledge area and disappeared. Story 36. Some White House lady sat at my bar and tried to get a drink without ID. She pulled out her White House ID card, which had no DOB. I work at the White House. I told her that her bosses would be very proud of me enforcing their laws when I didn't serve her a drink. Story 37. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp "do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. Story 38. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years, and I'm a supervisor at the local public library, and my former, now retired school librarian goes there. One day, I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi, and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. Story 39. Sort of a "you have no power here" moment, but funny nonetheless. My dad and I went to Lois one time, and the guy helping us had on a veteran hat and a few pins, kept trying to insinuate we didn't know what we were talking about and that we didn't need what we were there for, and kept trying to argue about everything. So my dad asked what service he was in trying to break ice, and the dude said he was in Team 6 1970 to 1974 in Vietnam and trained in Great Lakes, which was the wrong answer. So my dad asked if he meant SEAL Team 1 or 2. The man, recognizing my dad's service ring, immediately buffed up on my dad and got tomato-faced red and tried to assert dominance as a superior. So my dad immediately called the guy on his crap for stolen valor, explained why he was full of crap, and threatened to turn him in for it and get his management involved. I haven't seen that guy in town in a while. Story 40. In college, I worked for a small catering company that was started by a guy who was barely much older than college age himself, no more than early 30s. All of us that worked for him were college age or just over as well, so it was a young-looking crew in general. One day we were working an outdoor black tie wedding reception for over 300 people, and it was a scorcher out too temperature-wise. So not only was it hot out, and we're all in tuxes serving a crap ton of people, the family of the bride, who are funding this affair, are some of the rudest and most demanding people imaginable. So it was not the most fun gig in general. Well, one of the aunts on the brides turned out to be the rudest of the bunch and kept trying to pull the "I'm related to the bride, so give me act," even though she wasn't even in the ducking wedding party, and was just making the lives of any one of us who came in contact with her even more of a living hell than what we were experiencing, including the owner of the company, who was lead bartender at the main bar. Now that point is key because by some grace of whatever higher power, force, fate, kismet, or whatever you call it, I was also working that same bar, which gave me the opportunity to bear witness to the most beautifully constructed instance of comeuppance to which I had ever seen to that point, and don't expect to ever see it bettered again. The nightmare Karen aunt is in young Bossman's bar line and loudly complaining the whole time how long it's taking, and she shouldn't even have to be waiting in a line anyway because she's whatever the bride's name's aunt, just making a huge stink. When she got up to the head of the line to place her order, she said something along the lines of how slow and ineffectual he was, to which he responded something along the lines of, "We're going as the fast as we can, here's your drink, have a nice evening." through gritted teeth, I'm sure, which led her into the following diatribe. That's because you're nothing but a bunch of dumbass kids. Don't you have any adults back there working this wedding? I want to talk to your manager or the owner or someone who's an adult who can get you out of here and get the job done right. To which a huge crap-ass eating grin washed over his face as he replied, "Hi, his name, I am the owner of this catering company. Please note that if you would like for me to go, then this reception will have no food or beverages or bar service." I swear you could almost hear a hype crew descending from the heavens shouting, "Oh," after he said it. It was a moment of transcendence I don't think I'll ever experience again. Plus, the Carini ant didn't bother us again the rest of the night. Story 41. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charged per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job, and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties. It would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him, "That's fine, don't use me if you don't want to." Eventually, I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily, I didn't have to take the work. I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. Story 42. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CC editor some national newspaper. And most of his emails were things like, "Nothing damn works." None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally, he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you, I canceled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call. I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff." He gave us months of headaches over a 45 pounds per quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. Story 43. I used to work for a Super Y manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, crap-talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is crap than ever, and how much the store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, "If you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you." When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. Story 44. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly, and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No, I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing?" "Right. So, anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and, in all likelihood, we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." Story 45. Pretty much every time my in-laws come over. For over 20 years, they have attempted to dictate how I should live my life, raise my kids, dress, cook, etc. I always just nod and say, "I'll consider that," but not in a genuine way, in a condescending duck you way. When they press it, I simply say, "You may leave my house now." Story 46. I joined the Army Reserve in 1983, in between my junior and senior year in high school. Going to drill one weekend, and we were doing war games with another reserve unit. They mailed everyone a letter with the challenge and response to be let into the unit. As a lowly private, I was standing guard at the entrance and had to say the challenge. Everything's going good until a city police car pulls up and the cop is a new lieutenant. I give the challenge and he just looked at me. I say it again and he said to just let him in because he didn't know it. He starts getting belligerent and I ask him to turn off the car and step out. He gets out and starts yelling at me. The sergeant major heard the commotion and comes over and tears the young lieutenant a new asshole. It was very satisfying to watch, and I learned that day that even though a second lieutenant outranks a sergeant major, it really doesn't matter because the sergeant major had been in for 20 years and didn't put up with any crap. Story 47. The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment. My dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, "I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home." And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. Story 48. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the craft for 4.9K. Out costs were 9.3K. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge Karen and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that. But after that, they were going up to 10,000 per. She drove down with her boss the next day and then demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5,000 per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price. So if you have to pull the business, we understand." Her boss tripped over himself, cutting her off, and said they weren't pulling out, and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Story 49. I grew up around a mother with dissociative disorder as well as narcissism. She was addicted as far back as I can remember and would do anything to get them, and I mean anything. Growing up, it wasn't rare for her to have a tantrum during one of her highs and beat the crap out of me, break me down by picking apart every little thing she knew I was afraid or self-conscious of, and actively sabotage my relationship with my father and sibling. She would be up for days at a time, pass out standing up with her eyes glassed over and back hunched, and when she festered once again, start moving and otherwise destroying everything in the house. There were times where I'd leave and the house would be clean and come home, and it would look as though a pissed-off tornado had run through the house, that is. Broken glass, animal feces, dirty clothes, roaches, empty pill bottles, ground-up pill residue, and other miscellaneous things littering the house. On particularly bad nights, she would hallucinate, and during those times, it wouldn't be uncommon to find pools of her blood on the ground from running through glass. I remember being up for days at a time because her and my father would scream at each other for days at a time without stopping, actively trying to get me to pick one side or the other, even if it meant barging into my room at 4 a.m. to begin their screaming match where I could watch. She manipulated me, abandoned me at times in the middle of nowhere. When she'd meet up with her various sugar daddies, she was still with my dad during this, and never once apologized during her brief moments of mental clarity. If anything, she would blame everything but herself. In her mind, she was infallible. Money was always a big issue since she couldn't work in such a state. She sold some of her pills, yes, but ultimately those funds were used to buy more substances anyway. Because of this, we were homeless frequently, without power and water for literally years at a time, and barely ever had any food. It was almost every night I went to sleep with the only thing I'd have eaten that day being a school lunch. On weekends, sometimes I didn't eat at all. The rest of my family had no clue this was happening. During the summer, my aunt, whom I hadn't talked much with since I was a lot younger, got in touch. She asked if I'd like to come to stay with them in Texas for a few weeks during the summer. Of course I said yes, and I was absolutely ecstatic. I didn't bother asking my parents since I'd be very much surprised if they even noticed I was gone, so they were unaware. My aunt drove up all the way to Iowa and stayed the afternoon with us. My parents seemed to lack the cognition to recognize she was even there out of the blue, so they didn't come out of their room. As I stated before, would happen frequently. When she arrived, our house was fairly clean. We left for a bit to go get food, and when we returned, the tornado had already passed. As she told me when we were on our way to Texas, the thing that bothered her the most wasn't that our house had suddenly gone to hell. It was that I didn't even react to it. Instead, I tiptoed around the debris and started packing my things without a word. This deeply unsettled her, and ultimately she asked me if I was safe where I lived. I said yes, as it was all I had ever known. She told me that what she saw frightened her, and she wanted me to come live with her in Texas. Thinking that she was joking, I brushed it off. After a few days down there, though, I knew I had to do it. They showed me love, compassion, and care that I had never even known existed prior to this, and it shook me to my core. So we decided I was going to get emancipated from my parents and move in with them. Ultimately, this involved sitting in a courthouse across from my parents and their lawyer. The judge asked why I wanted to leave, and I explained the above. I expressed the love and compassion I'd experienced for the first time in my life, and that I wanted to, for once, live in peace. Their lawyer rebutted, "To me, it seems as though you have no respect for your parents. Is it because of their financial situation? It looks as though you're attached to the perks of living in a family that makes a reasonable amount of money, and not that you want to leave because they're unfit parents." My mother and father joined in, hooting and hollering actively, trying to break me down, as they have so many times before. I let him speak, I let them speak, and I held my tongue until it was my turn. They tried to goad me on, tried to break me as they had so many times before, but I wouldn't let them. Finally, the judge asked me to speak. With as level a stare as I could muster, I looked at Mother, my father, and their lawyer across from me and said, "If you're asking me if I have no respect for my parents, then you are correct." However, to say it's simply financially motivated is incorrect. I no longer have respect for them because they have, as I was nearly finished, my mother, as she had so many times in the past, began to squirm and scream at me from across the table. "He's lying. The little bastard is just..." Until the judge slammed his gavel down and cut the room, my mother staring up at him in complete and utter disbelief. I looked at her, keeping the tears I knew were right behind the corner at bay, and said, "For once in your life, for once in my life, behave as an adult. You can't stop me by simply yelling over me anymore. You have nothing to hold over me now. You can do nothing." As I spoke, the judge motioned to his officer, who moved towards my mother, her expression still frozen in complete bewilderment, as the officer aggressively told her to get up out of her chair and escorted her out of the room. The judge looked to me, my aunt, my father, and his lawyer with one sweeping glance and then spoke. "I am sorry that you have had to deal with this for so long, young man. There's nothing more that you or anyone else needs to say. You deserve to live a normal life as a normal kid, and it's obvious to me now that your parents are unfit to produce that kind of environment. You will go back to Texas with your aunt, and we will regularly have our social workers in touch to check in on how you're doing. Make the most of this second chance. Good luck, young man." Adjourned. Though the bang of his gavel was the only noise that permeated the room, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My father and his lawyer were escorted out of the room, and the tears I had held back all this time came gushing out like a tidal wave. It's been 7 years since that day, and I am happy to say that I've managed to grow up and become a well-adjusted adult. I have a great career, great friends, and an amazing girlfriend. I've been in therapy ever since we got back to Texas, and I no longer have trouble sleeping or terrible bouts of anxiety and depression as I used to. Life is good. Story 50. So my uncle is a deputy sheriff, and one time he was at an airport talking to my aunt over the phone in Spanish. Once he got done with his call, some nearby Karen that overheard him went up to him and started demanding to see his green card. Uncle has an accent too, so you can tell he wasn't born in the US. Uncle decides to duck with her and tells her he doesn't know what a green card is and has never heard of one. She gets more pissed and keeps demanding to see it. He messes with her some more. Then eventually he goes, "Well, I don't got a green card, but I got this." Then takes out his wallet and shows her his badge. She immediately walked away while my uncle laughed his ass off. Story 51. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy, and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in, prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up. The driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead, she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d'. "Back of the queue." Oof. Story 52. At my university, it was always fun to watch the people who had been high school popular people think that this sort of popularity would just naturally carry over and that on this campus of thousands, they'd be a big shot or something. It was always fun to see just how many people could not care less about their attention whoring. Story 53. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema, as a temporary thing while I figured out what the duck I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened around 5 years, who was a total Karen and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water, and she marched up to me going, "We don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know." To which I calmly responded that I was thirsty and needed a drink of water. And if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water, then good luck. But I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored because not my ducking problem, but internally I was put out about it because it was totally ducking pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in, I get promoted to supervisor. As I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards, I could walk and fart at the same time. But she also gets promoted to floor manager, so she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me and everyone else. 4 weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager, and at this point, we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go, saccharine sweet, "Oh, thanks. That's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me because you've been here 5 years and I've only been here 6 weeks. She had a face like a smacked arse. It was delightful. Story 54. Happened not to me, but around me. I have a coworker, friend in a hospitality company that was pretty huge. My coworker brought a lot of experience and skills to the table. So many executives and bosses want him working on their projects and their departments and their umbrella of the company. When it was time for him to ask for a raise, our manager, director, and executive director turned him down and lowballed him with a counteroffer. So insultingly low, he started looking for jobs outside of the company. CFO and other senior VPS heard about said move and reached out to him to get him to stay, and they worked it out amongst each other so they can share him in their special projects along with a hefty compensation package. Coworker, being respectful, puts in a request to transfer that has to be approved by the current manager, director, and executive director, which they promptly turn down. To make matters worse, they go ahead and write him up for attendance problems from a couple of months ago. We're all salary, and for the most part, project-based. Throughout all of this, I'm a fly on the wall since we shared an office. Here I am laughing with him while he was in phone calls with the literal people who ran the company. He was told to ignore all that. They apologized to him, they got VP of Human Relations in on the meeting, explained the situation, which then launched an internal investigation unbeknownst to the three clowns. The ensuing crapstorm that came down onto the three clowns is more than enough to make this story awesome. But the cherry on top is that he is now their boss. The way it would have worked before all this went down is that said executive director was going to be promoted into a VP position and move into the big players lounge in our main office. Director, which is clown number 2, would have taken EXECDer spot, and clown number 3, which was manager, would have taken director job. The powers that may be, CFO, senior VPS that were working behind the scenes, took this opportunity to let the clowns dig a hole for themselves. And to everybody's delight, they did. I'm going to start with the matter at hand. CFO and senior VPS told my coworker to sit tight, and they will make sure that he is taken care of, and that he from then on will be only taking instructions from them with the VP of HR on the phone. The process of rerouting him up the chain of command went super fast. I mean, why wouldn't it? The bosses who would have reviewed and approved all this have been working behind the scenes to make it happen, and they are all on the phone now. My coworker was told that by the next business day, he just had to fill in the proper paperwork and to send it straight to VP of HR, and formal announcements will be made to the rest of the company by the end of the week. My coworker then asked the bosses to use some of his newly granted compensation for a vacation week just to avoid the drama. This week was glorious. The clowns were busy calling my coworker, blowing up his phone. Loving the drama that was going on, I was texting him updates. Since clown number 1, 2, and 3 always relied on us salaried grunts to take care of everything for them, their incompetence kept showing in their big projects that have to be submitted to the same CFO and senior VPs that caused all this for them. Every one of our internal clients, other departments, execs, and bosses within the company was looking for my coworker. The incompetency of the clowns have spread across at the management level. They are all now bypassing them and going straight to us to get things done. HR was prompted by the VP of HR to start investigations in the background, and we were all interviewed and sworn to secrecy. The end of the week comes, and my coworker comes in, brand new suit, sits on his desk, and we start our usual banter. This is supposed to be the day of the big announcement. Clown number 3 calls my coworker into the office to write him up for as many things as clown number 3 can. This I cannot confirm because I'm only hearing this from my coworker, but apparently clown number 3 was putting the book down on him and threatened termination due to the number of offenses. They wouldn't have fired him. They needed him that much. My coworker has a habit of giving a deadpan face and just shrugging through everything that is not interesting to him. So apparently that's what he did. What I can confirm is that after this meeting, he showed me an email of said clown number 3 scheduling a meeting with him and clown number 2 and number 1, which he declines in front of me. He laughs, looks at me, says, "Watch this." He walks out, and after some time, comes back into the building with the senior VP straight to clown number 1's office, executive director. Some time passes, and it was fun to watch clown number 2, director, and clown number 3, manager, rush to the same office. They were all passed over for the promotions, were not granted their raises, and now all their projects go to my coworker for approval. I no longer work for the company. After some more drama, I have moved on as well. I'm still in touch with my coworker. The last update I have heard is that clown number 1 and number 2, exec director and director, would be retiring this year after so long with the company. I heard that number 3 burnt the team to the ground due to sheer incompetence and is on the way out as well. Number 3 started the team with a total of 9 direct reports, now down to 2. Story 55, I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me, saying he has all this money, and he tells me when he's done drinking, and he's not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank, tell him I'm done arguing with him, will not be serving him and his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The ducking bartender, now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule: don't piss off your bartender. Story 56. Years ago when I worked security at a bar, we had a fill-in DJ for our regular DJ who was out sick. This DJ was known to no be able to handle his liquor, so our bartenders were told to not serve him. Well, of course, some customers gave him some shots, and near the end of the night, about 30 minutes to close, he started getting mouthy on the mic and talking crap about how we wouldn't serve him. My manager came over to us and said, "Be prepared to throw him out. I have a CD ready to go." So about 5 minutes later, he threw our mic down and broke it and was using his headphones as a mic. Then he said, "And duck security." At that point, my fellow bouncer, who was about 6 feet 2 inches, 250 pounds, said, "That's it," and stormed over there and grabbed the approximately 5 feet 10 inches, 170 pounds DJ around the shoulders and neck and just straight yanked him out from behind the turntables. The turntables even made that nice needle screech too. He tossed him out the front door. The DJ then kept trying to come back in, saying he needed his stuff. I told him he could get it when we say he can get it. He then started threatening me with my job because he knows the owner. He did know the owner, but the owner liked me better because I helped him out my second night there when a customer pulled a knife on him. I just nodded and said, "Okay, go get him." He left and came back about 30 minutes after we closed. He walked in ahead of the owner with a smug look on his face, and the owner stepped towards us, then turned to the DJ and proceeded to scream at him about not disrespecting this bar and its workers and how he had no right to claim anything and act like he did. He ripped him up one side and down the other for a good minute or so. It looked like the DJ was about to cry. I would still see that same DJ around for years to come, and he still has an ego and tries to act like it never happened. But every time he's seen me, he goes, "Oh, hey, you worked at..." I just reply, "Yeah, the one we threw you out of." I still don't like that guy to this day. Story 57. Ex and I were moving out after a breakup, cleaning out garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a coworker until I could find a better place to live, as most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. I collected myself and said, "Because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do ever again." It was a really great feeling, because I literally thought of the "you have no power here" as I laughed. Story 58. I work in an NHS hospital. No one pays anything out of pocket for treatment here. It's all paid for through taxation. A patient was added onto our clinic who had paid one of our doctors for surgery privately at another hospital, but she was getting her follow-ups free on the NHS. Technically, this shouldn't happen, but it does. These patients can be a bit difficult. This lady's appointment was at 8:55 before we even started at 9 o'clock. She had her workup done when we actually clocked in and was all snooty about waiting 5 whole minutes, bearing in mind she's saving a fortune. Then one of the nurses from the ward called, and an actual NHS patient needed seen urgently, so they were brought up and seen ahead of the private patient. Well, this woman went mental, started shouting and bawling that she'd paid all this money and she demanded service. Our charge nurse went out, demanded to know who had taken money off of her, really drilled the patient to point to the person who had dared take money off of an NHS patient. Well, the woman went beetroot, stuttered that she had paid the other hospital, and the charge was like, "Exactly, your money is no good here. And doctor is being paid by the taxpayer to see this emergency patient first, so kindly sit down and be quiet or leave my department until you can be civil." Story 59. My friend has this awesome story from college. He was a school president, he was in charge of things, and had quite some power and responsibility. This one time, he had to organize a seminar, which was pretty important, especially because he was hosting. As he was going around making sure everything was running smoothly, he noticed a few students messing around and not rehearsing a speech they had to deliver. He questioned each of them on said speech, and as expected, none of them knew it well enough. So he asked them to start rehearsing, but as reckless as freshman students can get, they ignored the order. Being fed up with them, my friend simply took their presentation and told them to leave. That's when one of them snapped back, "You can't do that. You don't even know me. I know the president of the department." Showing off illusions of the amount of power a third grader has on a Thursday morning after a bowl of cereal. Naturally, my friend asked this schmuck to use their wild card and call the president. They took out their phone, started dialing, and guess what happened next? His phone started ringing. Now I'll let you imagine the sheer horror in this kid's eyes, the shame on their face, the cringe and regret for the rest of their life. I have no idea how my friend kept a straight face. This is one of my favorite "you have no power here" stories. Story 60. Worked in a cell phone store, both selling devices and service contracts in the UK. Some kid, 19-ish maybe, came in with a much shorter man who I later learned was his dad. For whatever reason, I forget what now, he wanted to cancel out of a contract he was partway through. Now, I could already tell from the way the kid explained it in exasperated terms that he knew he couldn't cancel out of it, but his dad wasn't taking his word for it and had dragged him in to try and sort it out for him. The contracts clearly state you can't cancel prematurely without paying off the rest of your dues, which I explained. And his father just went full boomer rage mode on me. Spitting, frothing, hurling vitriol. This guy clearly thought this was how you got things done. I stared him down, waited for him to finish, and repeated the contractual terms as stated. He hit me back with, "I'll report you for violating the Sale of Goods Act." Sucks to be him because I had that Karen memorized. I made a point of it, in fact, after the first few customers in my early days tried to bring it up to get their own way. Some chode on the internet had made posts about how you could sling the term around and usually scare retailers into doing what you want because they don't know it either. So it happened a lot, even when there was absolutely no call for it. I just looked at him and said, "Sure, go ahead, you can even use our phone," and pointed at the store phone right next to him. I knew he didn't have a leg to stand on, and any trade commissioner listening to his claim would laugh him off the line. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to proceed. After a moment of blank staring, he just turned and stormed out with his son, rolling his eyes so far back into his head he could probably see his own brain in embarrassment at his dad's tantrum. Story 61. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription, brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. Story 62. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a lien on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding, and I'd have to pay him all of this money, la-dee-da. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers, showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. Story 63. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June, after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, donated a lot to local sports. Big man in a small town. I'd given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to "how much will it cost to get him the A?" When I refused the bribe, he went to "you're fired." Not "I'm going to get you fired," but "you're fired, clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin. He's now banned from the property. Mr. "I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of shit," was threatened with the cops by Mr. Random Act PG, Story 64. I went to a private Catholic all-boys school for a few years. There was one kid who was such a stereotypical bully he could have stepped out of the pages of an old comic book. One day during gym, he threw a basketball while my back was turned and hit me square in the small of the back. It hurt like a Karen and I'd had enough. I assumed starting a blatant fight in front of a teacher would get me whooped by a teacher, suspended, or honestly expelled. I didn't care, as I was a dumb kid and was seeing red. I walked right over to that boy who was smirking at me and punched him square in the jaw. He then cowered and tried to protect his face, so I kept swinging into any exposed part of his head I could reach until the PE coach pulled me off of him. He of course made a huge deal that he hadn't hit back, and his friends agreed I'd attacked him for no reason. That same smirk returned to his face as the coach walked me out of the gym. The coach took me to the office and I was in sheer panic. I knew I was ducked. He handed me a stack of papers, the school's daily announcements for each classroom, and told me to pass them out. I did and was back in that same PE class before the end of the period. The look of shock on the bully's face when he saw me is something I cherish to this day. He asked me, "Didn't they punish you? Aren't you suspended?" And I responded with, "Yeah, they made me pass out the announcements." I really learned a lesson today, with the biggest crap-eating grin I've ever worn. He stopped picking on me after that, but not anyone else. Story 65. My parents came to visit, and my mother, who is very old-fashioned, the woman should be a homemaker, and if not, she shouldn't out-earn the man kind of old-fashioned, told my wife, who makes stacks as a dev team manager compared to my peanuts as a sports writer, "You know, dear, you really should try to keep a cleaner house." And without looking up from her making lunch, my wife said, "Yeah, your son forgot to clean this week before you guys flew in." The stunned look on my mom's face was priceless. Story 66. Girl came into my apartment to hang out with my roommate, demanded that I turn off the football game I was watching so we could focus on her. I literally said to her, "Who the hell do you think you are?" and kept watching the game. She yelled at me and stormed out. Thankfully, me and my roommate never saw her again. Story 67. A museum in a town added to its collection a replica of Michelangelo's famous nude statue, David. The pastor of a nearby church demanded that the curator remove it from display because it was inappropriate for public viewing. To her credit, the museum's curator told the clergyman in unequivocal terms that the church had no say in the matter, and that fine art would be exhibited without need for ecclesiastical approval. Story 68. I had worked for a company for 12 years. They had cut staff about 18 months prior and assigned the senior engineer workload to me, a normal engine, on top of my existing workload. After about a year, I began the conversation of a promotion to account for the increased work. Months and months went by with nothing, and then a 2% raise in April. They fired my boss, so I now worked for the plant manager, the highest level in the building. After 3 meetings of being blown off and "I'll see what we can do," I started looking for opportunities. I had one bite and give me an offer that I couldn't refuse, 25% plus raise for the exact same position down the road. I made one last attempt to argue my case as I really wanted a counteroffer. The plant manager would not accept a meeting, and I finally found him up at the water cooler. I told him I wanted to hash this out today. It was the 2-week mark on the dot, and he said, "I don't have time for you." So I let him know then and there that I would be leaving in 2 weeks, and I was on my way to HR to turn in notice. It was rough dragging my huge balls around the rest of the day. Story 69. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other, and over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that. And it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee, on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house, and if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologies tasted so sweet, as did the coffee. Story 70. A pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I worked for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about a year and a half before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular, there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired/suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problem, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accuse me of discrimination against their white middle-class son, etc. I simply asked, "Is your son over 18? Yes, so you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye." Story 71. Just last week, we had another supervisor from a different department come and tell us what he needed, not uncommon in my job. Like, "Oh, I need this by this date." But we're super swamped right now, and my coworker said, "Oh, we can probably get to that next week because we are working on another project." And the supervisor said, "This needs to be done now." And my coworker said, "We'll do it in 3 weeks. Sorry." And there's really nothing the other supervisor can do. Story 72. Not me, but a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grandmother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school, my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He's a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 a.m., and then he'd be off to work until around 10 p.m. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he'd lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. Story 73. In high school, one of the teachers who I didn't get along with was being condescending to me in the hall outside of the classroom. I had gone to the principal the day before to complain about the teacher's attitude towards myself and 2 girls that were in the same class, micromanaging us, singling us out, and making comments about us to the other students. For the record, I got good grades, but teacher would always try to dock points for the smallest mistakes. Missing a period, can't read your chicken scratch. I contemplated murder at that one. Paragraphs too big or too small, etc. So I complained about it to the principal, who then had a few extra hands look over my assignments and the assignments of the 2 girls, and concluded that the teacher was being a general nuisance. Teacher got a warning, but I was pulled out into the hall so she could talk down to me for snitching. Lo and behold, principal turns the corner, sees us, and starts speed marching over like Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. Explain yourself. I was just reprimanding him for disrupting the class. The duck you were. My office now. You go back in and sit down. I'll send another teacher down to watch the class. We got a sub for the rest of the week. And then they brought in a teacher from the opposite wing to teach in Story 74. My ex-husband had some narcissistic qualities. Nothing was ever his fault, no respect for differing opinions, etc. When we separated, I took him to court for child support, as I didn't trust we could work it out amongst ourselves. While in the courtroom, he starts getting mouthy with the judge. Same behavior he would have with me whenever we disagreed. He was upset about the amount he was being ordered to pay, even though he and I had discussed prior what the amount would be, as I had run it through the formula available on the state website. Anyway, he starts getting mouthy and talking over the judge. It was apparent he had no regard for the situation and proper courtroom etiquette. Again, he always acted as though he was above everything and could do no wrong. The judge wasn't having it at all. He raises his voice and states, "Mister, if you don't cut it out in my courtroom, I will have you detained." He motioned for the sheriff in the courtroom to walk over. I have never seen my ex-husband shut up so quickly. Story 75. My homeroom teacher in 10th grade, Mrs. Isaac, was awful. Among other things, she had a curious habit of making cheerful little comments to people about how they're going to hell, will die alone in the street, and other lovely things of this nature. She somehow also got management backing to do pretty much whatever she wanted, giving punishments, changing schedules without asking anyone, and so on. She had this going for several months until she made one big mistake. According to what I heard, at least, she chirped to the resident math teacher that married women who do not cover their hair go to hell. Said math teacher, of course, was a married woman who did not cover her hair and did not appreciate this comment. About a week later, Mrs. Isaac decided she is pulling her class from all other classes for a Bible prep marathon. Now, to be fair, there was a big exam coming, but you could say that about most of the other classes too. She sent a random 7th grader to our English classroom to tell the teacher that we're being called for a prep marathon. Who is calling? Mrs. Isaac. Oh, in that case, it's a no. We were utterly shocked and amused because that's not a thing teachers did. She made a few other attempts, but it seems all of the teachers decided they had enough and flat out refused to send us to her little prep marathon. The best part came on Thursday the same week. She sent in yet another 7th grader to call us, except this time it was math class. Who's calling them? Mrs. Isaac? So it doesn't matter. But Mrs. Isaac said, "I know, I don't care." Story 76. Ooh, I have a story for this. I got married 2 years ago at overseas because my wife is from Europe and they have cool castles and crap. My Canadian family and friends all came over because most had never been. We're a little older and well off, so we splurged. Wedding was awesome, dinner amazing, reception is in full swing, and quite frankly, it's a little warm. Warm for us Canadians. It was around 10 C in early November. When you mix in wool suits, drinking, and lots of dancing, some of us colonists were working up a bit of a sweat. Thankfully, the venue had a balcony with huge doors. I kept going over and opening them, as some folks were inside, some were outside, and there was a nice breeze, but I had to keep going over because they were shut whenever I looked back. Finally, after the 5th or 6th time, this guy followed me and demanded I keep the doors shut because it was cold inside. I didn't know who he was, so he must have been a +1 of someone on my wife's side, so I was mighty confused when he said, and I quote, "Who the hell do you think you are keeping these doors open and the temperature so low inside?" "I'm the guy who bought you dinner." I watched him go over to my now cousin-in-law and grab his coat and almost pull her out the front door. I thought one of my groomsmen was going to burst. He laughed so hard. Story 77. My ex was a narcissist, and I had learned to basically walk on eggshells in our relationship to try to keep the peace. We had 2 kids, and I was a stay-at-home dad who did more than 90% of the parenting. One of the tactics I used with our kids was counting to 3 when they were behaving badly, and if they hadn't shaped up, they would go to timeout. Cue forward to our divorce. She had manipulated the courts into granting her educational decision-making for our kids and enrolled them in a school far from me and close to her. I began volunteering at the school to help in class to give me more time with our kids. She called to tell me that she had made the executive decision that I couldn't do that anymore. I told her she had no right to make that decision. She pulled out the education decision-making card, and I told her that gave her no right to tell me what to do on my own time. She started ranting and wouldn't let it go. She had grown accustomed to me just giving in, and I wasn't doing that anymore. She started getting really angry and yelling. Without even thinking about it, I just said, 1. She paused for a moment and then started into it again. I said, 2. By that point, she got what I was doing, I think, because she took a breath and started a bit more calmly, but then she got to yelling again, and I said, 3, and I hung up the phone. She immediately called me back, and I ignored the call. She kept trying, and I kept ignoring it. 10 minutes later, I called her back, and we started talking again. She didn't yell, and of course, I kept volunteering at my kid's school because I'm a good dad, damn it. Story 78. Yesterday, HR asked me if I wanted to use my own personal time for punching in 5 minutes late, or if I wanted to take a tardy. My response was, I'm not taking crap because I was within the 7 minutes allowed under the resolved class action settlement. Unions are great. Story 79. I grew up fairly poor. In some of my HS classes, there was a very rich girl who liked to lord power over people. She had the teachers convinced she was a saint, though. One day, she and I got into an argument, and we were sent to the vice principal's office. I thought I was doomed. Lo and behold, the VP wasn't there that day, and the art teacher was filling in for this sort of thing. We told him what happened, and I mentioned that she acted like she was better than everyone else because she has nice clothing and money. She yelled that I was a liar, and the art teacher said, "You do act like you own the place." She was shocked and shut the hell up. Knowing someone finally believed me was just blissful. Story 80. When I was in my very early 20s, I learned that my BF had cheated on me for months, and the other girl was pregnant and keeping the baby. It was 100% certain, and I was so traumatized by this that I broke up with him over the phone in about 15 seconds, without revealing what I knew, and then went hard no contact. I didn't even want to yell at him. I wanted him to cease to exist. About a year later, I ended up with a short-term contract with his company that was too good to pass up, so I did my best to avoid him until one day cornered me and started into me, in front of about 6 of his coworkers, about how it was crap it was. We couldn't just be friends, how immature I was to avoid him, and how I couldn't even be basically civil to him. I blurted out, "Congratulations on the birth of your child. Remind me how old the babe is," and ran from the room. His coworkers put 2 and 2 together, and I hear he didn't last much longer there. Story 81. I was a salesman at a wire and cable place. I got a call Friday morning from a tow truck driver freaking out. He needed a replacement cable for his truck. SAP, because the weekends were the big business days for him, bragging about the big money and people who leave their cars somewhere overnight because they're too drunk to drive home. He was crapped and rude the whole time we were on the phone. He demanded that the cable be cut and shipped immediately. Sent next day air, Saturday delivery, pretty expensive. I rushed his order, ran back to the warehouse to hand it to the manager myself to make sure it could jump in line and get cut before the next day air guy showed up. But we did it, rushed every part of it, and got it shipped out in time. Every person involved prioritized this order to get it out to him on time. Tow truck dude calls me back later that afternoon saying he got the truck working and no longer needs the cable. He asked to cancel the order and get a refund. I explained to him that because he had it cut to a specific length, if we were to take it back, there would be a restock fee, because we're not going to be able to resell it until someone needs that exact specific length. I also explained that I can't refund the shipping costs because the order's already been shipped the way he demanded it be sent out. Dude loses his mind, screaming at me and telling me he's going to give the company terrible reviews everywhere and tell all his friends how we're all pieces of crap. There was literally nothing I could do for him. No amount of him being an asshole could uncut and unship that order. Story 82. I was a registration supervisor in an emergency department. Our manager was out for heart surgery, so the manager of a different facility was filling in. She was a righteous who needed everyone to bow to her authority. During a staff meeting, she tried to implement a policy that the president of our hospital has specifically rejected. Nothing major, just a process change in how we checked in patients arriving by EMS. This policy worked at her facility, but we weren't equipped to implement it. She knew this, but thought she was going to force us to do it as a way of showing how it was the better way. After she gave the instructions, she said, "Any questions?" My staff all turned and looked at me for a moment. Then one of them said, "Is this true? Okay. No, as you know, we've been told not to do this. Please continue arriving those patients as we have been." The manager flipped out and tried to write me up for insubordination. Took it to the director, who knew we weren't allowed to make this change. He shot her down and dismissed my write-up. It was super validating. It also helped me with my staff because they saw that I wouldn't let them or myself be pushed around. Story 83 was pulled over by AZDPS and they tried to ticket me for speeding on a highway smack dab in the middle of an Indian reservation. He asked to see my ID, my registration, and to search my car. All no's. "Okay, sir, have a great day." Story 84. Worked in a military biological research lab for a while as a civilian contractor. Every time a new military officer rotated in as the department head, approximately 2-year cycles, they'd try to boss around the civilians. We are legally allowed to ignore them. They had to filter requests through our civilian supervisors. HR supported us completely as it was a huge liability issue. Read, lots of paperwork for them if anyone escalated an issue. Ever tell a power-tripping, high-ranking U.S. military officer no? Great stuff. Story 85. I had a short stint as private investigator who specialized in providing investigative services to public defenders. We had this one county that was notorious for a sheriff's department that would make BS traffic stops as a pretext to search vehicles. One deputy in particular came up time and time again for this kind of thing. I was asked to interview this deputy for a defense attorney. Deputy had some of the worst report writing skills I've ever seen, riddled with grammar and spelling errors. Quite often, deputy wouldn't even include the reason he pulls people over in his reports. So I go to interview the guy. As part of the process, there's a senior sheriff's rep there that basically is supposed to protect deputies from people like me and keep them from saying things they shouldn't. We sit down and I pull out his report he wrote on the stop he made on my client's defendant. I've already marked it up, English teacher style, with a red pen, and start with, "I had some trouble understanding your report." I proceeded to go error by error for the purpose of clarifying the report. He's getting redder and redder. I then go into trying to determine why he pulled over the defendant because it's unclear in the report. He's not able to give a definitive response. All the while, the sheriff's rep, whom I've worked with a lot and who I have seen be very vocal protecting deputies in interviews like this in the past, is silent. Ultimately, charges against client are dropped. Months later, I'm driving through the area on the way home from camping, not speeding or breaking any traffic laws. I get pulled over by a deputy. It's the same deputy. He recognizes me immediately, stammers, and manages to say, it's almost dusk, turn on your headlights." He gets back in his vehicle and takes off before I've even started my engine. Story 86. One of the managers at my previous employer was living near me. I was not reporting to her, but my manager was sitting right next to this woman, so I had to see her multiple times every day. One day, she found out that I lived on the same street as her and started forcing me to visit her. I kept making excuses, but at one point, I couldn't come up with any more excuses, so I visited her. She sat me down and asked me why I was renting a house by myself, what caste my roommate was, and told me not to have lower caste people room with me, all the while subtly trying to find out what caste I was. I hated her. I couldn't really do anything about what she spoke because the HR was not even taking harassment complaints seriously, let alone this one. Also, it turned out, my apartment's owner was friends with this woman, and she had a spare key to my apartment that she stored on behalf of the owner who lived abroad. If she found out that I was in a relationship with someone not from my caste, then she could tell the owner, and they could have kicked me out for being sinful in their house. In a few months, I found a better job, and I gave my notice at that workplace. I was also getting married in a few weeks, so I was moving out of that house. Although I didn't expect anyone from that office to attend my wedding was held in a different state. It's kind of disrespectful in our culture if you don't invite everyone you know. It was my last day in that organization, and I was going around giving wedding invites to everyone. When I went over to my manager's desk, this lady was all smiling and waiting to get the invitation next. I simply invited my manager and then smiled at this woman and walked away. Also, I invited everyone in my apartment except my house owner, who specifically requested that I mail her my invite. My house owner called me after I vacated and asked where the invite was. I told her that I forgot and didn't have any left. Both of them didn't hold any power over me anymore, and both my employment and my housing situation were not in their control, so they could really do nothing about me disrespecting them. This might not be much, but it felt so good when I did it. Story 87. A cop pulled me over at 2 a.m. on my way home from work. He was visibly agitated that I wasn't the drunk driver he was fishing for. I asked him why he pulled me over, and he gave me some nonsense about swerving. I told him no, I wasn't. He walked away, did a 180, and came back with, "Well, if I searched your car right now, what might I find?" I laughed at him and told him that there was no way I would ever consent to a search. He walked away fuming. Story 88. This moment happened a couple days ago. I was at work and I saw one of my old water polo coaches at one of our pools. I'm a lifeguard with his team. A little detail about this coach is that he's kind of an asshole and discriminated players for which high school they're going to. He paid special attention to a certain high school since he was the water polo coach there too. I decided to come watch since I was off for the rest of the night, but needed to stay around until the facility completely closed. I don't know if he recognized me, but he got annoyed that I was standing there in his field of vision watching the practice. He told me to leave and that everything is fine now, and I politely explained that I am just watching. He more agitatedly asked me to go away, which I explained I worked here and I can stand wherever I want, since this isn't your pool, but rather the employees. He eventually asked for my manager, which coincidentally hated this coach too and got a good talking to. He's been giving me dirty looks the rest of the night. Can't wait to work night shifts again to see him. Story 89. My boss calling me at 7 a.m. on a Saturday to ask if I could lay some flooring for a friend of his at nearly half my normal rate. Yeah, hard pass, Andy. Story 90. An old dude asked for my manager as soon as I came out of the back room. Well, I worked in the men's shoe department at Macy's. I think he was mad he was waiting for help for a while. We were closing, so people were cleaning up, and there were only 3 employees for the whole floor. Went ahead and called my manager and let him know she was on her way. He said, "She? I want to talk to the man in charge." Well, to his dismay, every single manager in our store was a woman up to even the store manager. He just left. Felt awesome. My manager eventually showed up and we laughed about it. Story 91. When I worked for a private car park, there was a man who would park in disabled bays, took up 2 bays, and failed to display a blue badge. We issued him a parking ticket every time, and he ignored it over and over. Eventually, the company went to court and got a court-enforced ban for his vehicle. Basically, he was banned from entering the car park, and if he stepped foot on it, they would get arrested for trespass. Well, he kept ignoring the ban, and police kept being called, but they're always too slow, and he would have left by the time police arrived. So the company applied to have the vehicle towed. We had a tow truck on standby around the corner and waited for his vehicle to ping up on the ANPR system. Ding! His number plate flags up, and I text the tow truck. We wait for him to leave the car, and along comes this truck. Within seconds, the truck has deployed the crane, locked the wheels, and lifted the car onto the bed. Driver starts strapping the car down as the owner arrived. My manager and I stand there explaining that his car has been towed for trespassing and abandoning the vehicle, etc. Police are on the way and the tow truck is leaving. He starts to kick off about how it's a public car park, etc. Wrong. With a few sheets of paper, we show him the law, rules, and court rulings against him that he had ignored and also served him once the police arrived. The court counted judgment against him, forcing him to pay well in excess £7,000, all because he thought private car park companies were illegal and how Facebook was his source of facts. His vehicle was left unclaimed due to the high cost of recovery/storage, which allowed the company to claim the logbook and auction the vehicle off to recover the unpaid tickets. The guy got a good kick in the teeth that day. Brand new car gone, CCJ against his name, ducking his credit score for the next 10 years, and police arrested him for trespassing. All because Facebook told me I could do what I want. It was such a beautiful day. Story 92. U.S. college prof here. My favorite you have no power moments all have to do with FEAR-PA, a federal regulation that protects the privacy of college-level students. If someone like a parent wants to talk to me about a student's progress in my class, I'm legally not allowed to do so without a waiver, signed by the student. And even then, it is mostly optional. I teach predominantly freshmen, so I get at least one Karen/Ken parent a year. However, because of FEAR-PA, if they contact me demanding to talk about their kid's progress, I just say something akin to, "I'm sorry, but according to FEAR-PA regulations, I'm legally not allowed to discuss student names work with you. However, I am more than willing to talk directly to them should they have any questions/problem." I've had 1 or 2 parents try and go over my head, but it is a legal law, so they can't work around it without the student's permission, and that almost never happens. So these parents come to me thinking they'll rage their way to what they want, but it is just completely useless because of FERPA. Story 93. My first job was at the box office of a movie theater. The rule was you had to be 18 to see a rated R movie, but you could go see if a parent/guardian was somewhere in the building seeing a different movie. A mom tried to buy tickets for her daughter and friends to go see one. I explained the rules and she was enraged. She demanded to see the manager who explained the rules and refused the sale. Finally, she tried to claim that the sale should happen because her husband is a doctor. I just laughed. Story 94. My boyfriend told me this one. The school he went to didn't allow backpacks, same as my own, so students had to carry around folders and binders to their classes. Well, he had this cloth binder with a strap to go over his shoulder. What's funny in retrospect is that I also had one of these in middle school and never got crap for them. Anyways, he gets to school one day and it's already a few months into the year. He's been using his strapped binder with no issue, but the VP saw it and approached him. Conversation went like this. VP: "You're not allowed to have backpacks. I'm going to have to take that from you until the end of the day." B: "It's not a backpack, it's a binder with a strap." VP: "Well, it looks like a backpack and it's on your back. Do you have any folders?" B: "No, I don't. This is all I have." P: "Okay, you're just gonna have to empty it then and carry your papers to class until the end of the day." Boyfriend wasn't having it. Like any middle schooler, he would just cram his papers in there and didn't want to carry a stack of papers around for the next 6 hours. He continues to disagree, and she eventually takes him into the office. Conversation continues. VP: "Can I take your papers out? You can have it back at the end of the day." B: "No." VP: "Well, you're not leaving this office with it." B: "That's fine. I didn't want to go to class anyways." This pisses her off, and she says she'll be back once he's ready to have a polite discussion and leaves. Tries to sweat him out, thinking he'd get so bored he'd rather just carry the papers to see his friend. But he is incredibly stubborn, so that never happened. She eventually gets sick of him, in there, and tells him fine, just get a new binder after that day, and he agrees, gets up and leaves the office. He never got a new binder. She would see him later in the halls for the rest of the year, telling him, "You can't have that." And each time he would retort with, "Are you gonna take me to the office?" He had it for the rest of the year. Story 95. When I was younger and worked at a grocery store, my store did a week where corporate had to work with us every year. This one lady was screaming and complaining that we didn't have some brand of something, and we had the corporate lady standing next to me saying, "We won't ever carry that brand." Story 96. I was a cashier working at the returns counter for a big box store. Customer wanted to return a drill that stopped working after he dropped it in wet concrete. I told him I couldn't take it back. He got all huffy and wanted to see the manager. The manager backed me up and refused to take it back as well. Things escalated, and the customer threatened to call the CEO, who was a personal friend, and get us both fired. I had recently done some volunteer work that the CEO was heavily involved in and had directly worked with him on it over the past few months, so I had his personal phone number. I took out my phone and brought up the CEO's contact page on my phone, showed it to Guy, and asked if he wanted me to place the call for him. He threw the drill in the trash can and stormed out. The look on my manager's face was priceless. Story 97. I worked at a prison for 10 years. A lot of the captains were notorious for giving in to newer employees' demands for training usually reserved for senior officers, or at the very least, easier jobs away from inmates. One night I was talking with one of the captains in his office and a new officer came in. He'd been there about 3 months or so. He started asking the captain for some particular training. The captain kept telling him no because there were senior officers ahead of him. Naturally, this 20-something-year-old kid started whining about so-and-so getting trained and he wasn't, and they felt like they have proven their worth. The captain got up and started walking circles around the officer as if he was looking for something, checked his shirt collar, pockets, and even made him give him his wallet, and he looked through it. He finally sat down and looked at his own collar and touched his captain's pin and said, "Holy crap, you almost had me convinced that I wasn't the decision maker. Get the duck out of my office." He was my favorite supervisor of all time, still is. Story 98. I had a guy check my laptop, but it came back to me fixed without my consent, and he was trying to get me to pay 6 times the usual rate of what he did. We were mediated by a local government official to see if we could resolve this among ourselves. He was spewing lies about me, asking him to proceed with fixing it, but I saw his face turn pale as I showed everyone there the pictures of our messages indicating otherwise. I even did a little research on the laws he violated and recited it to everyone. I finished it off by saying, "I am willing to spend 3 times more than what he's asking me, just to see justice come through," and I heard him whimper a bit. He ended up returning my laptop and didn't ask for anything. Definitely had no power there. I'm still quite proud of myself. Story 99. Every word of this story is true. My younger sister and I have different dads. Her dad was an alcoholic, abusive asshole to our mom. She left him at Christmas 1981. Christmas 82 rolls around, and they were divorced by then, but he wanted to see his daughter at Christmas. So he came by my grandparents' house, and for Christmas Eve, we always have a big celebration with food, family, etc. Before we continue, a word about my grandfather. He was a card-carrying badass. Purple Heart in World War II, also fought in Korea, old school NRA, etc. At some point, my sister's dad gets some liquor in him and starts telling my mother, in front of all of us, how he is going to whip her ass and doesn't care who is there. No one's going to stop him. It got dead quiet. Everyone was really on edge. After a few moments, my grandma gave me another present to open. My grandfather just walked out of the room. When he walked back in, he was holding his shotgun at waist level. He looked at my sister's dad dead in the eyes and said, "The only reason I don't put this up your ass and pull the trigger is that my wife just redecorated this room." Pure Eastwood crap. My sister's dad got up and walked out without turning his back to my grandpa. The old man just kept the gun pointed at him until he got in his car and drove off. Then he put the gun up and we enjoyed the rest of our Christmas Eve. I was 6 years old. To say that made an impression on me would be a gigantic understatement. Story 100. I once had a boss try to give me a disciplinary 3 months later, I may add, for my behavior, as it was noted I was rude to her by several of the group's CEOs in a board meeting. On the disciplinary forms, you both have to write your version of the events, and it goes to HR for an adjudication. She did her part, and I casually filled in something to the effect of, "Manager continually pressured me into deleting files from our client management system prior to a regulatory audit, which is against the ethical code of our profession and not aligned with my moral standards. I accept I was short with her, but she was trying to force me into performing an illegal activity." I watched her collect up the paper, and the color drained from her face. I never did hear from HR. She got fired not long after when I casually mentioned to the CEO in a bar if she remembered the encounter and explained why I may have appeared a little frustrated and upset. Bye, Felicia. Story 101. The day after we signed the papers for our first house, we stopped by to move some things in. We pulled up to the house and saw the previous owner digging up the last three plants in the front yard. She had pulled up everything else in the yard and loaded up the back of her pickup. It was packed. It was a corner lot, so there were multiple beds on 2 sides of the house. When we asked her what the fuck she was doing, she said she had just planted them to make the house look nicer while it was listed for sale, and that she really liked them and didn't want to have to, but more for her new house. We got to meet the local cops that day. She had the choice of replanting them all back exactly how they were before, or get arrested. She spent the next 5+ hours making that crap right again. The cops said to call them when she was done, and looked everything over before they let her go with the warning that if she ever came back, she would be arrested. Never saw her again. Also found her weed stash on the top of the kitchen cabinets a few days later. Story 102. I had an elderly lady come into the pharmacy I work at when I was roughly 17. It's a community pharmacy, and all the patients and people in the community have been going there a while. They know the owner, and he knows them. She was acting really suspicious and terse with the employees, walking around shrinking away from people and crap. I saw her grab something and put it into her purse, a couple things of Robitussin. I walk up to her and say, "Ma'am, I need you to put that back or pay for it. And if you were wanting to sell that or use it to make something, it doesn't even have the right ingredients." I should clarify that this is in Clarksdale, MS, one of the biggest meth and substances abuse places in the country. She acts accosted and starts screaming that I need to unhand her and stop trying to abuse her. And then, "I'm good friends with the owner. And when he hears how abusive you are, I hope you learn to be a proper man while finding a new job." So I stayed in front of the door and calmly said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry I've offended you. The owner's here today, actually." She walks back and starts hollering, "Where's Eric? This young man is abusing me." The owner rushed out, looked at me and said, "What happened?" She said, "He accused me of taking medicine," and I looked at the bag. The owner and pharmacist looks at me, then asks her, "Did you take any?" She said, "Mr. Eric, I've known you since I moved here 4 years ago, and I don't like this little boy you have working for you. His mama didn't teach him how to treat a lady." To which he said, "I think she did a fine job. She's my wife. Let me see in your bag." Story 103. I found out my parents wanted to send me to a different secondary school from all my friends for several reasons that made sense to them, but little lonely me who didn't have many friends was not happy at all to be losing those I had. And then I found out that not only would I have to start all over again, but this school had lessons on Saturdays. Well, duck that. I hated school at that age. Weekends were my refuge, and now I was even losing some of that. I cried, I begged, pleaded, but their minds were set. And then someone let slip that this school had an entrance exam. It wasn't difficult. I was pretty sure I could pass it, but my parents clearly assumed it was a given, clearly having forgotten that I had free will, or assuming that I was so used to doing what I was told that I'd just do it. Wrong. In my very first act of childhood rebellion, aged 11, I went and told them that if they made me do it, I would fail the entrance exam on purpose. You could see that it had not even occurred to them that this could happen. I still remember the moment of pure, unadulterated, surprised Pikachu face before the sputtering, shouting, threatening, not violence, just grounding, loss of privileges, etc., began. My favorite exchange involved my mom telling me that I would pass that exam and me responding, "No, I won't. You can't make me," and rendering her, for one of the first times in our relationship, speechless. The whole thing was as revelatory for them, especially my mom, as it was for me. I learned to stand up for myself, and that I had free will, and they learned that I wasn't some obedient little girl who would participate without question, and was not just always going to meekly fall in line. The change of school thing was dropped. I didn't really even get punished too much, because I hadn't actually done anything wrong, and my parents, who may have come off sounding terrible but were in fact wonderful, just unaware of the stubbornness they'd gifted their daughter, felt uneasy about teaching me that exercising free will was wrong, particularly as my mom was a teacher. I wasn't allowed a writing lesson that week, and that was it. Funnily enough, I now think I probably would have been better off changing schools. The reason I didn't have many friends was that I was bullied at school, quiet, academic, wore the most ridiculous glasses, adult-sized, on a 7-year-old's face, because my sight was so crap that they didn't make lenses the strength I needed in child sizes in the 80s. So a new start in a new school where no one knew me would have been an opportunity to start over. But the fact that I'd been bullied made that seem like a horror instead of a good thing, and I didn't have many friends. But those friendships were hard-won and close because we were all the outcasts for various reasons. Kids suck. That school, despite the Saturday lessons, catered for more of my interests and favorite subjects too. Thing is, if my parents had sat me down and talked to me about it, pointing out the positives of a new start, and that the school had a curriculum that I'd love, and reassuring me they probably could have talked me into it, the mistake they made was simply trying to steamroller me and ignore my feelings and thoughts. So there's a parenting tip for you. If this story ever comes up, my parents deny it or say I'm misremembering or embellishing it, but I'm honestly not. It was such a moment of revelation to me, such a formative experience that it's imprinted on my memory the day I learned that I had free will even if it contradicted my parents.